Hello. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Westside Congregation in Rio Rancho. In keeping with our state's pandemic protocol, we are videotaping our service so that you can view it safely at home. I am the Reverend Dr. Nancy Hitt, consulting minister for this congregation. This is our Memorial Day service. It is titled, A Failure of Memory. It is based on our sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and source 2, words and deeds of prophetic people which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. We hope that you are able to explore and increase your understanding of these valuable standards through this program. Today, we thank Jimmy Stevens for his expertise in taping this service and uploading it to YouTube and to our website so that you can view it, along with Steve Poyani, who cues our music and sounds the chime to move us from one segment of our service to the next. If you have never visited Westside before, we welcome you. We invite you to visit us in person when we are able to resume on-site services in the future. While there is no date for that as yet, check our website for updates. It will be posted there when it is available. I have just a few announcements to share with you today. Your board will meet on May 24th to evaluate our video service format and prepare plans for the future use of our building as restrictions loosen in our state. They have a full agenda of items to discuss. If you have an issue or a concern or a hope that you would like them to know about, please either email or call Steve, your board president, or myself. I also want to let you know that I had a lovely telephone meeting with Reverend Sarah Shore, our Pacific Mountain Regional contact from our parent denomination this past week. Reverend Sarah is relatively newly appointed to this position. She is responsible for helping small churches, and that is us. While we didn't identify anything in particular that she could do for us at this moment, we did establish a very cordial connection. This is a good thing for our congregation. I will keep you apprised of helpful information and programming that I receive from her over the course of time. Lastly, it was called to my attention this past week that it has been quite a while since we've received an offering for the Ministerial Support Fund. It currently has less than $100 in it. The funds that are donated to that account are used to help people in need. Customarily, we have purchased food, medicine, and gas for people, helped to pay utility bills, and occasionally helped with professional licensure or other necessary expenses that people were having difficulty meeting. Although its use is not restricted to members of our own congregation, it is primarily used among ourselves. If you would like to contribute to this fund, please mail your check to Post Office Box 15146 in Rio Rancho. Please note in the memo line that your funds are designated for the Ministerial Support Fund. Thank you. If you have a personal chalice or a candle that you would like to light, please draw it closer to you now and join me in speaking our chalice lighting as the words appear on your screen. Down through time and around our world, people have sacrificed their lives for what they believed in. By the light of our chalice flame, May we see more clearly than ever what it means to spend our lives for what matters most. Shalom and amen. Please join me now in affirming our aspirations as the words appear before you. Life is a gift. We gather in community to celebrate the glories and the mysteries of this great gift. In the light of truth and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest for truth is our sacrament, and service is our prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve others in community, to the end that all souls grow into harmony with creation. Thus do we covenant with one another. Blessed be. I invite you now to sit back comfortably wherever you are, to close your eyes gently, and begin to focus on your breathing. Breathing deeply and fully, in and out, clearing your mind of leftover energy and tension. Simply breathe, and then into your inner stillness, let an image appear, an image of a monument built to commemorate your life. Examine it closely. How is it shaped? What color is it? What size is it? Are there words on your monument? What do they say? Is there a symbol on any part of it that is particularly meaningful to you? Circle around it in your mind's eye, absorbing all the facets of your memorial monument. Commit them to memory. Hold them close in your heart. Having circled your stone, return your focus to your breathing, keeping it deep and full. And when you are ready, open your eyes and return your focus to the here and now. Shalom. I am happy to share a number of joys and concerns from our community this week. Some are personal, and some incorporate various aspects of the world we live in. I invite you to enter into a receptive place in your mind as I share them with you. At their conclusion, we will light our joys and concerns candles together. So draw yours closer to you if you have one at home now. As always, please be careful with open flame. With Stacy, we share her joy that her employer is now 36 weeks into her pregnancy, and we hope for as close to a full-term baby as is possible for her. With Michelle, we celebrate her grandson's remarkable vocabulary and social skills as he thrives in the midst of the pandemic lockdown that surrounds him with loving family in close quarters. With Donna, we share concern for all the people who are misled by news headlines and conspiracy theories about the pandemic. We hope that they will find a way to accept scientific truth and be less fearful. We hold a special concern for the health of the Navajo Nation and other tribes who have limited health resources and are struggling to care for their people in the midst of this world health crisis. With Lonnie and Joe, we rejoice that there is now clarity about the source of the fire that destroyed Lonnie's craft room in their house. We are hopeful that PNM will act appropriately to prevent other such crises in their area. We also share their joy and concern on behalf of their daughter-in-law Tracy and her newborn daughter Olivia. Olivia was born this past Tuesday evening and weighed in at a teeny tiny 2 pounds and 9 ounces. However, she cried spontaneously, suggesting nice, healthy lungs, and we hope that she grows to be a very sturdy baby. We also rejoice in Jimmy's recovery. This video you're viewing is the proof that he is back on his feet and back at work on our behalf. And we are really glad that Carol is back home from Florida, safe and sound. We're looking forward to her participation in our services in the foreseeable future. I also ask your thoughts and prayers for my brother-in-law, Johnny, who was surprised to discover that he needed a pacemaker this past week on a somewhat urgent basis. For that and his myriad other health issues, please hold him in concern. For people struggling with the cautious resumption of business in the midst of the pandemic, for the leaders of our state and our nation, for the researchers and public health officials working to take safe care of all citizens, we hold concern and we express gratitude for their efforts on our behalf. We also take a special moment to lift up Rick, who has experienced yet another death in his family. These past 9 months have been marked by much loss and grief. Marion's stepfather and Rick's friend, Frank Potter, passed away on Saturday, May 13th. Your thoughts and prayers for comfort in the midst of the pain of grief are appreciated. In a moment, I'm going to step down and light our memorial candle, which is in memory of Frank Potter for the light that he brought into the lives of both Marion and Rick. And then we will light our Joys and Concerns candle together. In memory of Frank Potter and the light that he brought into Marion and Rick's life, and now please join me as we light our Joys and Concerns candles together. Shalom. Now, we have a very special story for today, which, as I mentioned, is our Memorial Day Sunday service. And so, our good friend, Riley the Rabbit, is going to help me tell the story. You will notice that Riley is wearing a very special flower on this ear. And this is the story of how we got the Remembrance Day poppy, as the red flower was originally known. The story goes like this. What was originally known as the Remembrance Day symbolism of the poppy started with a poem written by a World War I brigade surgeon who was struck by the sight of the red flowers growing on a ravaged battlefield. Across northern France and Flanders, which is northern Belgium, the brutal clashes between Allied and Central Powers soldiers tore up the fields and forests. tearing up trees and plants and wreaking havoc on the soil beneath. But in the warm early spring of 1915, bright red flowers began peeking through the battle-scarred land. The flower was known variously as the Flanders poppy, corn poppy, red poppy, and corn rose. The brilliantly colored flower is actually classified as a weed, which makes sense given its tenacious nature. Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae, a Canadian who served as the brigade surgeon for an Allied artillery unit, spotted a cluster of poppies that spring, shortly after a battle. McCrae tended to the wounded and got a first-hand look at the carnage of that clash. Struck by the sight of bright red blooms on broken ground, McCrae wrote the poem In Flanders Field, in which he channeled the voice of fallen soldiers buried under those hardy poppies. Published in Punch magazine in late 1915, the poem would be used at countless memorial ceremonies and became one of the most famous works of art to emerge from World War I. Across the Atlantic, a woman named Moina Michael read In Flanders Field in the pages of the Ladies' Home Journal that November, just 2 days before the armistice. A professor at the University of Georgia at the time the war broke out, she had taken a leave of absence to volunteer at the New York headquarters of the Young Women's Christian Association, the UUWC, which trained and sponsored workers overseas. Inspired by McCrae's verses, Michael wrote her own poem in response, which she called We Shall Keep Faith. As a sign of this faith, and as a remembrance of the sacrifices of Flanders Field, Michael vowed to always wear a red poppy. She found a batch of fabric blooms for herself and her colleagues at a department store. After the war ended, she returned to the university town of Athens and came up with the idea of making and selling red silk poppies to raise money to support returning veterans. By the 1920s, the poppy was adopted by the American Legion as the official U.S. national emblem of remembrance. Back in France, a woman named Anna Guerin organized French women, children, and veterans to make and sell artificial poppies as a way to fund the restoration of war-torn France. Within a year, she had brought her campaign to England, where in November of 1921, the newly founded Royal British Legion held its first ever Poppy Appeal, which sold millions of the silk flowers and raised over £106,000, which was a very hefty sum at that point in time. This went toward finding employment and housing for veterans. The following year, Major George Howson set up the Poppy Factory in Richmond, England, in which disabled servicemen were employed to make the fabric and paper blooms. Other nations soon followed suit in adopting the poppy as their official symbol of remembrance. Today, nearly a century after World War I ended, millions of people in the United Kingdom, Canada, France, Belgium, Australia, and New Zealand wear the red flowers every November 11th, known as Remembrance Day or Armistice Day to them, to commemorate the anniversary of the 1918 armistice. The Poppy Factory, now located in Richmond, England, and Edinburgh, Scotland, is still the center of poppy production, making as many as 45 million poppies of varying materials each year. Here in the United States, the tradition has developed a little differently. Americans don't typically wear poppies on November 11th, which for us is Veterans Day, which honors all living veterans. Instead, we wear the symbolic red flower on Memorial Day, the last Monday in May, to commemorate the sacrifice of so many men and women who have given their lives fighting for their country. So there we have it, a tenacious weed that came to symbolize the sacrifice of soldiers' lives in World War I. The poppy is enshrined in a famous poem. It was used to commemorate fallen soldiers. It was used to raise funds for veterans, and its manufacture put disabled veterans to work. That's quite a story for a little weed, isn't it? And Riley's, while it was not made at that famous factory, you can see that Riley wears this with pride, and so do I. Thank you, Riley. It has been said that one of the first things a detective does when trying to find someone is to look at their checkbook, because how and where we spend our money shows what matters most to us. To everyone who has continued to send your pledge and other financial contributions in during the pandemic, we thank you. We appreciate knowing how much this congregation means to you. Our mailing address is Post Office Box 15146 in Rio Rancho. You may also use the PayPal button on our website. Thank you for your generosity and your loyalty. I would like to read to you now our Memorial Day poem that was written by Archibald MacLeish. It is titled, "The Young Dead Soldiers," and it goes like this. The young dead soldiers do not speak. Nevertheless, they are heard in the still houses. Who has not heard them? They have a silence that speaks for them at night, and when the clock counts. They say, "We were young. We have died. Remember us." They say, "We have done what we could, but until it is finished, it is not done." They say, "We have given our lives, but until it is finished, no one can know what our lives gave." They say, "Our deaths are not ours. They are yours. They will mean what you make them." They say, "Whether our lives and our deaths were for peace and a new hope, or for nothing, we cannot say. It is you who must say this." They say, "We leave you our deaths. Give them their meaning." We were young, they say. We have died. Remember us. Our deaths are not ours. They are yours. They will mean what you make them. That is a fearsome responsibility. How do we remember our nation's dead? What meaningful sense do we make of their deaths? How do we determine whether their lives and deaths were for peace and new hope, or for nothing? It is extraordinarily difficult to determine the meaning of even a single life. How do we account for the astronomical number who have died in armed conflict since human beings first raised arms against one another? Even if we limit ourselves to those who have died in recent and well-documented history, an artificial line in the sand, if ever there was one, how do we explain it? There is a temptation to avoid it. Like other painfully difficult situations, we may obscure and camouflage it so that its harsh realities blur into bunting of red, white, and blue. We rescheduled it from its original date of May 30th to the last Monday of the month of May so that we could have a 3-day weekend. Practical, perhaps, but is it meaningful? That 3-day weekend has become known as the start of summer fun, filled with family picnics and barbecues and firecrackers. Our economy took advantage of that. It's now apparently your patriotic duty to buy a new mattress for Memorial Day, redefining the original concept of rest in peace. Apparently this year, the pandemic limiting travel, many people feel robbed of their traditional Memorial Day. That barbecue will have to be backyard only, the guests your immediate household or family. There is perhaps an emotional logic to focusing on fun and family and food in the face of needing to remember death and devastation. Fun and family and food all inspire us with hope and energy for the future. Remembering death and devastation really damps down a party. But Memorial Day was never intended to be a party. It was intended to be a sobering day of remembering the violence, the devastation, the tragic deaths of war on both sides of our own American Civil War. It began informally. The Civil War ended in the spring of 1865. It claimed more lives in the conflict than any other in U.S. history. It necessitated the establishment of our national cemeteries. By the end of the 1860s, citizens in various cities and towns began to hold ceremonies to say prayers together and to decorate the graves of the fallen with flowers. Ultimately, the city of Waterloo, New York, would be named as the official first place that Decoration Day, now Memorial Day, was celebrated. However, not that long ago, in 1996, documents were found at Yale University describing a first Decoration Day that predates everything else by a year or more. During the Civil War, the Confederacy commandeered the Washington Race Course and Jockey Club in Charleston, South Carolina, and they used it as a prison for Union soldiers. Some 260 Union soldiers died while imprisoned there. The bodies were buried in a mass grave behind the grandstands. When Charleston fell and the city was evacuated, pretty much only the freed blacks remained. One of the first things they did was to give the Union soldiers a proper burial. They exhumed the mass grave and reinterred the bodies in a newly created cemetery. They put a tall, whitewashed fence around it and a sign that read, "Martyrs of the Race Course." I really hope the wordplay was intentional. On May 1st of 1865, 10,000 people, mostly emancipated slaves and a few missionaries, held a parade around the racetrack. 3,000 black children carried flowers and sang John Brown's Body, which you may recall is the melody that Julia Ward Howe set the battle hymn of the resting slavery and the Civil War. Members of the famous Massachusetts 54th and other black regiments marched. Black pastors recited scripture. That was the first Decoration Day in our nation's history. Although reported in the New York Tribune and the Charleston Courier, the story was somehow lost to history until found by researcher David Blight. No cookouts, no firecrackers, no new mattresses. Flowers, prayers, and people marching in respect. They made meaningful sense of the Union soldiers' deaths. Ultimately, the race course and the cemetery were torn down. The soldiers' remains moved once again, this time to Beaufort National Cemetery. The story got buried in the archives. It was a really inconvenient memory for a southern city. Over time, such celebrations became enshrined as part of our national practice. Following World War I, and after the scope of remembrance expanded to include all the men and women who have fallen in service to our country in every branch of our military. On May 5th of 1868, General John A. Logan called for a nationwide day of remembrance. He suggested May 30th specifically because no battle was fought, nothing was won, and nothing was lost on that date. Now, that stood as the day to remember our nation's fallen soldiers until 1971, when Congress reassigned it and other holidays all to a Monday in the service of three-day weekends. That was also when Memorial Day became a federal holiday. I gotta tell you, I love a good three-day weekend, but I really wish that Memorial Day stood alone as one that was too important to be obliterated by convenience and commercial concerns. This year, we're caught up in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. We're calling it a war and using a lot of military imagery to describe our experience of it. There are a lot of similarities between the pandemic and war. The virus is deadly for many people. We have thousands of deaths due to COVID-19. The general public is affected by scarcity of work, of food, leisure activities. We're in various states of lockdown depending on where we are across our nation. Our taken-for-granted liberties have been affected by the need to preserve life. We're in a bizarre sort of uniform in that we wear masks to protect ourselves and each other. Things look and feel very different. Frontline workers, from those in our grocery stores to those in our hospitals and mortuaries, are overwhelmed. The imagery of war, of feeling that we are under attack, rings true, especially in the trenches of first response. Workers who have been assaulted and murdered are certainly victims of our armed response to the war on the virus. We need to remember them and honor their sacrifices when we think about our response to the pandemic. But you know, this isn't a war. It's a pandemic, a public health crisis. That's different from a war. In war, we arm ourselves and commit acts of violence to exert power over others for a cause that we believe in. A cause that we have decided justifies killing people who do not comply with our values or our way of life. That is not what a pandemic is about. Where war calls for violence against an identifiable enemy, we can't even see the virus. We don't know who has it, and who doesn't. If you tested negative on Monday, you could be positive on Thursday and never even know it. You could be an asymptomatic carrier, sort of a viral secret weapon. Except the virus is unintelligent. It cannot plan and strategize. Its scope of practice is very limited. It just happens that within those limits, it's a potentially deadly force to human beings. And let us remember, all human beings, men, women, children, citizens of every nation, and also a few other species as well. The virus is blind to our values and virtues in a way that war never is. When it comes to war, our values and virtues define which side of the war we're on. So here's the thing. When it comes to the pandemic, there are no violent weapons to subdue it. The virus does challenge our survival, but the means of subduing it are radically different from war. Where war works on a currency of power and violence to establish control, the virus is actually controlled by cooperation and collaboration among people, among all people. To survive a virus, we all have to work together to contain it. With war, we generally designate particular people as expendable and put them in harm's way for our own greater good, as we see it. We call them soldiers. Certainly we hope to develop a vaccine that enables us to be proactive and to prevent future viral outbreaks. But in the meantime, it's all about cooperation and collaboration for the common good. That's almost as hard as going to war for some of us. We'd prefer a clearly visible enemy to bring down. But that isn't part of this. What we have with the pandemic is something very different from war. Something we need to respond to constructively with each other. Naming the pandemic a war is a very dramatic image, but it's false. It's dangerous. It perpetuates the images of war as justifiable and necessary. Let's not sink to the lowest human level of exerting power over others so that we can get what we want, no matter how much we want it or how much it means to us. You know, if the pandemic was not imaged as war, it would be a lot more difficult for people to justify turning to guns and violence to fight it. So let's not do a mashup of Memorial Day and the COVID-19 pandemic. They are different realities. Those who are hard at work on behalf of the rest of us fighting the pandemic need to be honored and remembered for what they are actually doing, not folded into Memorial Day as an afterthought that makes the rest of us feel gracious. Memorial Day calls the question, why war? When we review our nation's history, when we review our human history, we have to ask, why war? And more, why still war? In any other circumstance, we would happily advise people who keep repeatedly doing the same thing while hoping for a different outcome that they're insane. Experience is supposed to teach us. Are we having a failure of memory? Do we forget the failures of war when the next one approaches? Are all of our existing war dead not enough? Is their sacrifice not sufficient? In the poem that we read by Archibald MacLeish, the young dead soldiers say that their deaths are not theirs, they are ours. We are the ones who have to make meaningful sense of them. How do we do that? We're still motivated by our fear of the person with more power or bigger guns than we have. We still resort to massive, deadly violence against our fellow humans when we feel sufficiently threatened. What if we tried something new, something different from the same old declaration of war that only works until the next time someone with more power and bigger guns comes along? What if we took those dead soldiers seriously and said, "No more"? What if those who have already died for causes noble and not were enough for us to learn that war doesn't work in the long run, and that repeating the same thing over and over is just crazy and doesn't work? How many wars to end all wars do we need to have? Why can't the Army wage peace? Many of our current military personnel and our veterans cite service to our nation and her people as the reason they signed up. There hasn't been a draft in this country since 1973. Every woman and man who serve do so of their own volition. They want to serve our country, and they do, often admirably. We have precedent for the military doing non-aggressive things, things that really matter to a lot of people. Think of the National Guard during COVID-19 screening, and the Army renovating buildings and turning them into hospitals. Humanitarian assistance, disaster relief. There are a lot of very important peaceful activities that our military already provides. So, let's give our nation's military dead due honor and meaning. Let their sacrifice stand. Let it be enough. Stop making more dead soldiers. Let that be our noble response to the sacrifice of lives in the service of our country. Make it matter. They died for peace and noble values. Do not let them die in vain. Remember what they stood for, what they died for, and make your life matter on their behalf. Do not let your memory fail. You can give their death meaning. Shalom and Amen. I invite you once again to respond to our program today, either by adding your comments below the video on our website or emailing me directly at ministeruuwc@gmail.com. All of your questions, comments, and feedback are helpful. We really do appreciate them. Now I invite you to join me, please, in saying the words together as we extinguish our chalice, and they appear before you on your screen. Like the lives of the dead soldiers, our chalice flame is gone from sight, yet still lingers in our hearts. May we demonstrate what it has taught us in this hour throughout the rest of our lives. Shalom and blessed be. Make your life matter. Honor all living. Respect the dead. Remember, learn, and teach for the future. Go now in peace. May the spirit of love surround you, wherever you go, whoever you are with, and however you have need. Shalom and amen.